The staccato eruption of gunfire, 3 distinct, sharp reports tore through the humid, mid-morning air of Oak Haven Trails, a sprawling suburban enclave, usually defined by the gentle whir of robotic lawnmowers, the distant shouts of children engaged in elaborate sidewalk chalk artistry, and the melodic call of the ice cream truck in the late afternoons. Captain Eva Rostova, commander of the city's esteemed mounted police division, was on her knees in the damp earth of her side garden, a sanctuary of unruly tomato plants and fiercely independent herbs, a rare Saturday, granting her respite from the relentless demands of her urban command. The sound, alien and violent, slammed into her consciousness, bypassing civilian surprise and triggering years of ingrained professional alertness. Her head snapped up dirt, smudging her cheekbone. Each crack had been followed by a split-second echo suggesting open ground, perhaps the common parkland that served as a verdant buffer between the neat residential cul-de-sacs and the Serenity Range Therapeutic Riding Center. Horses. The thought was immediate, a cold fist clenching around her heart. The shots were dangerously, impossibly close. She was already on her feet, the trowel clattering unheeded onto the flagstone path, her body moving with an athletic urgency that belied the peaceful domesticity of her surroundings. The initial shockwave of the gunfire was now being chased by a new, more horrifying sound, the high, thin screams of children raw with terror, interwoven with the frantic, panicked nickering and trumpeting whinnies of distressed horses. The bucolic tranquility of Oak Haven Trails had been savagely violated. As she sprinted from her yard, her worn denim shorts and faded Police Academy t-shirt, offering no hint of her rank, and rounded the curve of Juniper Way onto Sycamore Lane, the tableau of chaos unfurled before her, like a scene from a nightmare. Several horses, their powerful bodies slick with sweat, eyes rolling white with fear, were plunging and bucking, their usually placid natures shattered. Their handlers, mostly young women volunteers from the look of their practical attire and earnest, terrified faces, clung to lead ropes, their own smaller forms precariously balanced against the brute panic of animals weighing half a ton or more. Children, small and vulnerable, were being hastily, desperately guided away from the epicenter of the turmoil by adults, parents, therapists, their faces masks of disbelief and incipient fury. One horse, a striking palomino with a flaxen mane, had broken entirely free. It galloped with a wild, unseeing terror down the center of Sycamore Lane, its tooled leather saddle slipping precariously to one side, a child's bright pink riding helmet, emblazoned with cartoon unicorns, banging against its lathered flank, still attached by a single chin strap. The image of that empty, bouncing helmet seared itself into Eva's mind. Her gaze, honed by countless street operations and emergency responses, swept the scene, assessing, prioritizing, searching for the point of origin, the lingering threat. It landed with a chilling certainty on the immaculate 2-story colonial at the dead end of the cul-de-sac number 12. Its lawn was a carpet of unnerving perfection, its flower beds regimented explosions of color, its white picket fence a monument to suburban propriety. And there, standing on the sweeping front porch, as if observing a rather distasteful garden pest, was a woman. Slender, almost willowy, dressed in expensive-looking cream linen trousers and a pale yellow silk blouse that seemed untouched by the morning's oppressive humidity. In her right hand, held with a casualness that was utterly obscene, was a dark metallic object that glinted in the sunlight, a revolver. Her expression was not one of fear or even surprise. It was a look of cold, righteous anger, a chilling self-possession that turned Eva's blood to ice. Eva knew her, Ms. Deirdre Finch, a resident whose reputation for meticulousness was matched only by her propensity for lodging complaints with the Homeowners Association over infractions so minor they bordered on the microscopic. A misplaced garbage can, a dog barking with undue enthusiasm, a neighbor's child giggling too loudly during what Ms. Finch apparently deemed quiet hours. Deirdre Eva's voice, rarely raised, but capable of carrying over the roar of a riot, sliced through the cacophony. "What in the name of God do you think you are doing?" Deirdre Finch's head turned with a slow, deliberate movement, her cool gray eyes, the color of a winter sky, fixing on Eva. There was no recognition of Eva as a neighbor, only as an interruption. "I am protecting my property, Captain Rostova." She stated, her voice surprisingly clear and carrying, though devoid of inflection. She knew Ava's name, her profession. That made it worse. And my right to tranquility. These creatures, she gestured dismissively with her chin towards the frantic scene of terrified children and animals, and their constant disruptive presence, are an intolerable nuisance. This neighborhood is for peaceful enjoyment, not for this. The word, laden with contempt, encompassed the therapy horses, the disabled children, finding solace and strength on their backs, the dedicated individuals who facilitated these small miracles. Ava felt a surge of cold, controlled fury, a dangerous emotion she rarely allowed herself, but Deirdre Finch's callous disregard for the terror she had unleashed, the potential for catastrophic injury or death, was beyond comprehension. Her training took over a practiced calm, overlaying the visceral anger. Her left hand was already fishing her personal cell phone from the pocket of her shorts, her thumb hitting the 911 speed dial, her eyes never leaving Deirdre, never leaving the weapon, still held with such chilling composure. 911, what is your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was tinny in her ear. This is Captain Eva Rostova, City Mounted Police. Eva said, her voice level, betraying none of the turmoil within. Shots fired, Oak Haven Trails, corner of Sycamore and Juniper. Active shooter, female Caucasian 50s, armed with a handgun, currently on the porch of number 12 Sycamore Lane. Multiple potential victims, including children and horses, from the Serenity Reigns therapy program. Request immediate multiple unit police response, EMS, and animal control. I am on scene unarmed. The quiet cul-de-sac moments before a picture of suburban Serenity had transformed into a potential kill zone. And Deirdre Finch, the self-appointed guardian of its peace, stood at its heart, the angel of its destruction. The fact that the immediate victims were children with disabilities and the therapy horses, creatures Eva had dedicated her life to understanding and working alongside, made this not just a crime, but a desecration. Her rare day of quiet gardening was replaced by a crisis that struck at the very core of her being, both as a police commander and as a human being. Captain Eva Rostova's existence was a testament to the profound, almost mystical connection between humans and horses, a bond forged in the sun-drenched pastures of her grandparents' farm in rural Pennsylvania. She had been a solitary child, more comfortable in the silent company of animals than in the boisterous games of her peers. Her grandfather, a taciturn man with hands like gnarled oak roots, had been the one to lift her onto the broad, gentle back of Daisy, a sway-backed Appaloosa mare whose patience was as boundless as the summer sky. That first ride, the world viewed from a new, exhilarating perspective, the rhythmic sway of the horse beneath her, had been a revelation. It wasn't just the freedom, the power. It was the communication, the unspoken understanding that passed between rider and horse, a language of touch, balance, and intent. This early passion didn't lead her down the conventional path of ribbons and showmanship. Instead, it ignited a fascination with the working horse, the animal as partner, as indispensable ally. She devoured books on cavalry history, on the mounted patrols of the Canadian Rockies, on the intricate training of police horses. While her peers dreamed of proms and college parties, Eva dreamed of the disciplined ballet of a mounted unit, navigating a crowded street, the quiet authority of an officer on horseback. Her decision to join the police academy, and then to fight for a coveted spot in the mounted division, had been met with skepticism from some quarters. She was a woman relatively small in stature, entering a traditionally male-dominated field. But her diminutive size belied a core of tempered steel, an unyielding determination, and an almost preternatural ability with horses. She didn't just ride them. She understood them, their fears, their courage, their immense capacity for trust, if it was earned. Her rise through the ranks had been steady, marked by quiet competence, bravery in the face of danger, and an unwavering commitment to her human and equine charges. She'd faced down angry protesters, navigated treacherous alleyways, searched for missing persons in rugged parkland, and participated in countless community events where her horse, a magnificent jet-black Percheron cross named Vulcan, often served as an ambassador, breaking down barriers with his calm demeanor and gentle nuzzles. When the position of commander of the mounted division opened up, she was the clear, if initially underestimated, choice. Her office, a Spartan room tucked away in the sprawling complex of the city stables, was a fragrant haven of worn leather saddle soap and the faint, comforting aroma of hay and horse. Photographs adorned the walls, not of dignitaries or awards, but of the horses she had partnered with over the years, each one a story, a memory, a debt of gratitude. Her connection to therapy animals was deeply personal, rooted in the struggles of her younger sister Clara. Clara, a gifted artist, had been crippled by debilitating anxiety attacks in her late teens, withdrawing into a world of shadows and fear. Conventional therapies had yielded little progress until a desperate doctor suggested equine-assisted therapy. Ava had been skeptical at first, but she had witnessed the transformation herself. Clara, initially terrified, had slowly painstakingly formed a bond with a rescued thoroughbred mare, a creature as scarred and fragile as she was. In the mare's silent, non-judgmental presence, Clara had found a space to breathe, to heal, to rediscover her voice. The memory of Clara's first genuine smile in months, her face buried in the mare's coarse mane, was a potent reminder to Eva of the extraordinary healing power these animals possessed. Serenity Reigns, therapeutic riding center, nestled on 20 acres of rolling meadow and woodland, adjacent to Oak Haven Trails, had been a quiet source of approval for Ava since she'd moved into the neighborhood 5 years ago. She knew its founders, Dr. Alastair Reed, a retired child psychiatrist with a mane of white hair and an infectious laugh, and his wife Sarah, a former Olympic dressage competitor whose quiet intensity was balanced by a profound empathy. Ava had occasionally volunteered her time on quiet weekends, helping with fence mending or simply offering her expertise on equine behavior. She'd seen the magic firsthand, children like 8-year-old Lily, whose cerebral palsy confined her to a wheelchair, experiencing the liberating sensation of movement astride a broad-backed fjord named Thor, her delighted laughter echoing through the trees. Or young Thomas, a boy on the autism spectrum who rarely spoke, chattering animatedly to a patient Shetland pony named Patches, their conversations a secret language understood only by them. The bridle paths that Serenity Reigns utilized, which skirted the edge of Oak Haven Trail's common greenbelt, were vital to their program, offering sensory experiences and physical challenges that couldn't be replicated in an enclosed arena. Deirdre Finch, resident of 12. Sycamore Lane viewed these activities not as miracles of healing, but as personal affronts. A widow in her late 50s, her husband, a purportedly wealthy but obscure commodities broker, had passed away several years before her arrival in Oak Haven Trails, leaving her with a substantial inheritance and an apparently inexhaustible supply of grievances. She had no children, no discernible hobbies beyond the meticulous, almost fanatical tending of her garden, and the equally meticulous cataloging of her neighbors' perceived failings. Her house was a fortress of solitude and judgment. The roses she cultivated, while technically perfect, seemed to lack any scent, their beauty sterile and forbidding. Her interactions with other residents were invariably curt, often critical, her rare smiles as thin and brittle as winter ice. She had quickly established herself as the HOA's most prolific and persistent complainant, her letters penned in an elegant but spidery script detailing every rustle of a leaf, every misplaced tricycle, every exuberant bark that dared to disturb the sacrosanct quiet she believed she was owed. The inciting incident, Deirdre Finch's decision to open fire on a group of disabled children and their therapy horses, was, Eva would rapidly learn, not a sudden, inexplicable snap. It was the violent crescendo of a meticulously orchestrated months-long campaign of escalating psychological warfare. Her initial salvos had been insidious, designed for maximum irritation with minimum traceability. She'd taken to leaving her lawn sprinklers on for extended periods, timing them to coincide with Serenity Reigns' use of the adjacent bridle path, ensuring the riders were drenched and the path became a quagmire of slick mud. She developed a sudden passion for playing opera at deafening volumes from her open windows during therapy sessions, the dramatic crescendos often startling the horses. Anonymous notes began appearing on the Serenity Reigns community bulletin board, typed and vaguely threatening, alluding to safety concerns and the unsuitability of the area for such activities. When these tactics failed to yield her desired result, the complete cessation of Serenity Reigns' presence near her property, Deirdre escalated her efforts through official channels. She became a fixture at the monthly Oak Haven Trails Homeowners Association meetings, her voice a sharp, insistent drone cutting through the usual discussions of budget shortfalls and landscaping contracts. She presented meticulously documented evidence of the nuisance's photographs of hoof prints on the edge of the common land, which Serenity Reigns was permitted to use decibel-level readings of children's laughter taken with a newly purchased sound meter, and even samples of horse manure collected in plastic baggies and presented to the horrified HOA board. She spoke of potential health hazards, the risk of runaway animals, a prophecy she would later attempt to fulfill herself, and the deleterious effect on property values. The HOA board, a typically suburban mix of well-intentioned but largely ineffectual volunteers, was presided over by Harold Jenkins, a retired actuary whose defining characteristic was an almost pathological aversion to conflict. Faced with Deirdre Finch's relentless onslaught on one side and the quiet dignity of Dr. Reed and the Serenity Reigns supporters on the other, the board dithered. They formed subcommittees to study the issue commission reports on noise abatement and repeatedly deferred any actual decision, hoping it seemed that Deirdre would spontaneously combust or Serenity Reigns would magically relocate. This inaction, Eva knew from bitter experience, was often the fertile ground in which bullies thrived. As the sirens wailed closer, a chaotic ballet of flashing lights and purposeful movement began to unfold on Sycamore Lane. Eva, despite being off-duty and emotionally entangled, found herself seamlessly directing the initial response, her training a solid bedrock beneath the shock. The first patrol officers on scene, young, wide-eyed, and clearly rattled by the report of active shooter children involved, looked to her for guidance. "Secure the weapon first," Eva commanded, her voice calm, but carrying unmistakable authority. "Then, secure the suspect. One officer on her at all times. Establish a perimeter. Get witness statements from everyone who saw what happened. I want that Palomino caught and checked immediately." Deirdre Finch offered no resistance. As two officers' guns, drawn cautiously, approached her porch, she placed the revolver carefully on the white wicker table beside her antique watering can, her movements almost languid. "There's no need for such theatrics, officers," she said, her voice tinged with annoyance. "I am not a common criminal." She submitted to being handcuffed with an air of affronted dignity, her gaze sweeping disdainfully over the commotion she had caused. Eva's primary concern shifted to the victims, both human and equine. Paramedics were already triaging their calm professionalism, a stark contrast to the raw emotion of the parents. One little girl, no older than 7, with bright red pigtails and leg braces, was sobbing hysterically in her mother's arms. A teenage boy, his face ashen, was being treated for an asthma attack, likely triggered by the terror. Miraculously, it appeared no child had sustained a direct gunshot wound, though several had scrapes and bruises from hurried dismounts or falls from startled horses. Then there were the animals. Officer Martinez, one of Eva's most trusted mounted patrolmen, arrived, his own face grim as he took in the scene. He, along with a couple of quick-thinking Serenity Reigns volunteers, managed to corner the terrified Palomino, whose name Eva learned was Sunshine, in a neighbor's unfenced rose garden. The horse was trembling violently, its golden coat dark with sweat, a long bloody scrape adorning one flank where it had likely sideswiped a mailbox in its flight. Eva ran a practiced hand over Sunshine's heaving side, murmuring soothing nonsense. Another horse, a stocky gray mare named Misty, had a superficial but bleeding graze high on her left hindquarter, a tangible, undeniable piece of evidence that a bullet had come terrifyingly close. Young Chloe, the volunteer who had been handling Gus, the placid Clydesdale cross, when the shooting started, was trying to comfort the massive horse, who stood with his head hanging, his entire body quivering like a leaf in a storm. 6-year-old Leo, the non-verbal boy who adored Gus, was sitting on the curb wrapped in a blanket, despite the heat, his mother holding him tight. He wasn't crying, but his eyes, huge and dark in his small pale face, were fixed on Gus, an expression of profound, uncomprehending hurt within them. The bond between child and horse, so carefully nurtured, had been brutally assaulted. The early stages of the investigation rapidly uncovered the depth of Deirdre Finch's animosity. In her initial interview at the precinct, which she attended with a crisp, newly acquired silk scarf, artfully draped to conceal the handcuff marks, and still without legal representation, a decision that bespoke either extreme arrogance or a profound detachment from reality, she remained stubbornly unrepentant. Eva sat in on the interview, a silent, observing presence, her official capacity as commander allowing her access, though Detective Marcus Rourke, a seasoned, seen-it-all investigator from homicide, temporarily assigned due to the firearm's discharge, conducted the questioning. Ms. Finch Rourke, began his voice a low, patient rumble. Can you explain why you discharged a firearm in a residential neighborhood in the direction of children? Deirdre sipped delicately from the bottled water provided. As I informed Captain Rostova detective, I was exercising my right to protect my property and ensure my peace and quiet. Those animals are a constant disruption. Their noise, their smell, their sheer presence is an affront. I fired warning shots, nothing more, to scare them away. It's perfectly understandable if you consider the provocation I've endured. Provocation. Rourke raised a skeptical eyebrow. The sound of children, some of them disabled, enjoying therapeutic horseback riding. Their therapy, as you call it, should not infringe upon my rights as a homeowner. Deirdre retorted, a flicker of impatience in her cool gray eyes. This is an upscale community. We have standards. Those activities belong elsewhere. Frankly, I'm surprised the HOA hasn't dealt with them before now. My actions were a direct result of their negligence. Her utter lack of remorse, her attempt to shift blame, was breathtaking. The charges were quickly formalized, multiple counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, reckless endangerment felony level, given the presence of children, unlawful discharge of a firearm within city limits, and several counts of animal cruelty under the state's enhanced statutes for offenses against therapy animals. Her collection of firearms, the .38 Smith & Wesson revolver used in the incident, a .22 semi-automatic rifle, and a 12-gauge shotgun, all legally registered but now confiscated, along with a significant cache of ammunition, were cataloged as evidence. A search warrant executed at her meticulously ordered home yielded not only the weapons, but also a series of spiral-bound notebooks. In these notebooks, Deirdre had kept a detailed, almost obsessive log of Serenity Rain's activities dating back over a year. Times, dates, perceived infractions, even sketches of the horses and riders were all recorded in her precise angular handwriting, interspersed with vitriolic commentary about the decline of neighborhood standards and the intolerable burden of their presence. It was a chilling portrait of a mind consumed by resentment. The first truly shocking revelation in the unfolding drama, beyond the appalling nature of the crime itself, was the deliberate, systematic campaign of low-level terror Deirdre Finch had waged against Serenity Rains prior to the shooting. Dr. Alastair Reed, his usual benevolent features etched with sorrow and anger, provided Detective Rourke and Eva with a chronology of incidents. It began almost a year ago, he recounted, his voice heavy, during an interview in his small cluttered office at the riding center, the comforting scent of hay and horses doing little to dispel the gloom. First, the anonymous complaints to every conceivable city agency, health department, animal control, zoning. All of them found us in perfect compliance, of course. Then more direct harassment began. He detailed the incidents, the deliberate placement of sharp gravel and broken glass on the bridle paths, the discovery on 3 separate occasions of roofing tacks scattered like malevolent seeds where the horses trod. The time, a length of nearly invisible fishing line had been strung tautly between 2 trees at perfect neck height for a child on a pony. We found that one just in time. Sarah Reed interjected, her voice tight with emotion. One of our more observant volunteers spotted the glint of it in the sun. If a child had ridden into that. She didn't finish the sentence, her hand flying to her mouth. They had installed motion-activated security cameras along the section of the trail bordering Deirdre's property, but she had been infuriatingly cunning. The acts of sabotage often occurred in the camera's blind spots or during brief periods when the system was down for maintenance or battery changes. Parents also reported Deirdre shouting insults from her yard, her voice a venomous hiss, calling their children retarded, damaged goods, and the horses filthy, disease-ridden beasts. Several families had stopped using that particular section of the trail, their children too frightened their own nerves, too frayed by the constant undercurrent of hostility. The Reeds had reported these incidents to the HOA, and even informally to a community liaison officer at the local police precinct, but without concrete proof, linking Deirdre directly to the more serious acts of sabotage, and with her actions often falling into a gray area of neighborly dispute. Little official action had been taken beyond a few cautionary conversations. The shooting, therefore, was not an aberration, but a terrifying escalation. The second shocking development was the complicity, whether through cowardice or active support, of certain elements within the Oak Haven Trails Homeowners Association. Harold Jenkins, the HOA president, issued a statement that was a masterpiece of equivocation, deploring the unfortunate incident while simultaneously referring to the long-standing and complex issues surrounding Serenity Reigns and the need for mutual respect for community standards from all parties. This infuriated a large segment of the community who saw it as a craven attempt to appease Deirdre Finch even after her heinous actions. An emergency HOA meeting was convened in the community clubhouse a week after the shooting. The room, usually the domain of sleepy discussions about pool maintenance and holiday decorating contests, was packed to overflowing the atmosphere, thick with tension and barely suppressed outrage. Deirdre Finch attended out on a surprisingly low bail, secured by a newly retained, notoriously aggressive defense attorney named Alana Carlisle, a woman known for her scorched earth tactics and her ability to find loopholes in the most ironclad cases. Deirdre herself, dressed in an elegant charcoal gray suit, projected an aura of wronged victimhood, her expression carefully composed into lines of dignified suffering. Alana Carlisle immediately went on the offensive, accusing Serenity Reigns of provoking Ms. Finch through their flagrant disregard for neighborhood covenants and their creation of a hazardous environment. She implied that Ms. Finch, a vulnerable widow, had felt threatened and had acted in self-defense, however imperfectly. She then shocked the room by announcing that Ms. Finch was considering a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the HOA for failing to protect her property rights and for the emotional distress caused by their alleged negligence. Several residents gasped. A few of Deirdre's known sympathizers on the board, notably a woman named Esther Crabtree, whose own lawn was a testament to chemical warfare against dandelions, and a retired military man, Colonel Thorne, another Thorne the city was apparently full of them, who valued order above all else, nodded gravely, muttering about property owners' rights and maintaining decorum. It was then that parents of the traumatized children began to speak. Maria Rodriguez, mother of 7-year-old Sophia, who had been on Sunshine when the horse bolted, stood up, her voice trembling but clear. "My daughter," she said, her dark eyes flashing, "has not slept through the night since this happened. She screams if she hears a loud noise. She was learning to walk with more confidence, to trust, and your decorum, Ms. Finch, your property rights, have stolen that from her. What kind of a monster shoots at children?" Other parents followed their testimonies, raw, heartbreaking, and utterly damning. Chloe, the young volunteer, pale but resolute, described the sheer terror of that morning, her voice cracking as she recounted Leo's silent catatonic fear. Eva Rostova present as a homeowner, but her identity as the mounted police commander, lending an unspoken weight to her presence, listened with a growing sense of cold fury. The attempts by Carlisle and Deirdre's allies to twist the narrative to victim-blame children and a charitable organization were obscene. It was clear that this battle would be fought not just in the courtroom, but in the heart of the community itself. The midpoint twist in the investigation came from an unexpected quarter, Deirdre Finch's own meticulously curated digital life. Detective Rourke, a man who believed that the internet rarely forgot and never forgave, assigned a tech-savvy young officer, Detective Anya Sharma, to conduct a deep dive into Deirdre's online footprint. Under the deceptively innocuous pseudonym Suburban Sanctity, Deirdre Finch maintained a vibrant, if deeply disturbing presence on a constellation of niche online forums and social media groups. These were not mainstream platforms, but darker corners of the internet dedicated to radical property rights theories, extreme NIMBY activism. Not in My Backyard, and most alarmingly forums that espoused a thinly veiled eugenics-adjacent ideology, railing against the societal burden of individuals with disabilities and the perceived erosion of community purity. In these forums, Suburban Sanctity 1 had been prolific. Her posts about Serenity Reigns dating back months were filled with unadulterated venom. She referred to the therapy children as defectives, genetic mistakes, and an aesthetic blight on the neighborhood. She described the horses as beasts of burden, better suited for the glue factory, and lamented how their presence was dragging down the aspirational quality of Oak Haven trails. Her language was dehumanizing, filled with a cold, clinical cruelty that was far more chilling than any outburst of temper. The truly damning discovery, however, lay within a series of encrypted private messages exchanged with a user named Patriot Prepper, 76, on a fringe firearms enthusiast forum that advocated for extreme interpretations of Second Amendment rights. In these messages, exchanged just 3 days before the shooting, Deirdre, as suburban sanctity, had explicitly inquired about effective, non-lethal deterrents for large, persistent animal trespassers, and more pointedly, the legal ramifications of discharging a firearm on one's own property to scare off unwanted animals if one feels threatened, especially if there are less desirable individuals accompanying them. Patriot Prepper 76, whose own profile was festooned with survivalist rhetoric and anti-government screeds, had advised her that a good dose of birdshot will sting like hell and teach any animal a lesson without usually causing a fatal wound, especially if aimed low. He had also counseled her to make sure you articulate clearly that you were in fear for your safety from the animals and maybe even from the handlers, if questioned. Stand your ground, laws are your friend, ma'am. While Deirdre had ultimately used .38 caliber live rounds, not birdshot, the premeditation was undeniable. She had researched methods of using her firearms against the horses, had sought advice on how to frame it as self-defense, and had clearly harbored a deep-seated, ideologically driven hatred for the children of Serenity Reigns. This wasn't a case of a frustrated homeowner snapping. This was a calculated act of intimidation rooted in prejudice, meticulously planned and callously executed. When Detective Sharma presented these findings to Eva and Rourke, a grim silence filled the briefing room. The digital trail had transformed Deirdre Finch from a neighborhood nuisance into a figure of profound ideological malice. The prosecution now had a smoking gun, not just literally, but metaphorically as well. News of these online postings, carefully curated excerpts, of which were eventually leaked to a tenacious local investigative reporter by a source presumed to be within the police department, a leak Eva privately suspected Rourke had orchestrated to counter Alana Carlisle's aggressive media campaign, sent shockwaves through Oak Haven trails and the wider city. The narrative of Deirdre Finch as a merely eccentric and overly fastidious homeowner shattered, replaced by the far more sinister image of a hate-motivated individual. The climax of the community drama arrived with the force of a summer thunderstorm during a specially convened general meeting of the Oak Haven Trails Homeowners Association. This meeting, forced by a petition signed by over 70% of the homeowners, was held not in the small community clubhouse, but in the cavernous auditorium of the local high school to accommodate the expected turnout. The agenda was stark, a vote of no confidence in Harold Jenkins and the current HOA board members, who had enabled Deirdre Finch the immediate expulsion of Deirdre Finch from any and all HOA committees, a largely symbolic but deeply resonant act, and the ratification of a new community harmony and safety charter drafted by a coalition of residents, legal experts, and representatives from Serenity Reigns. The auditorium buzzed with an electric tension. Deirdre Finch was conspicuously absent, though her lawyer, Alana Carlisle, sat in the front row, her expression glacial, a phalanx of junior associates flanking her like stone gargoyles. Harold Jenkins and the beleaguered board members sat on the stage, looking small and besieged under the harsh glare of the stage lights. One by one, residents approached the microphone in the center aisle to speak. The testimonies were raw, impassioned, and filled with a newfound courage. Elderly Mrs. Henderson, who had rarely spoken above a whisper at previous meetings, her voice trembling but firm, condemned the board's cowardice. Young David Miller, a college student home for the summer, spoke eloquently about the values of tolerance and inclusion that had been so egregiously violated. Maria Rodriguez once again shared Sophia's ongoing struggles, her words bringing tears to many eyes. Dr. Alastair Reed, his voice hoarse with emotion, spoke of the sanctity of childhood and the mission of serenity. Reigns, his quiet dignity, a powerful rebuke to the hatred that had been unleashed. Then Captain Eva Rostova, at the specific request of the ad hoc residence committee organizing the meeting, walked onto the stage. She was in her full dress uniform, the crisp navy tunic, the gleaming brass buttons, the Sam Brown belt, the polished riding boots, a symbol of authority order and an unwavering commitment to justice. The auditorium fell into a profound silence. She did not speak of the criminal case against Deirdre Finch. That was for the courts. Instead, she spoke as a resident of Oak Haven Trails, a fellow homeowner, and as the commander of a police division dedicated to protection and service. Tonight, Eva began her voice clear and resonant, needing no amplification in the suddenly still room we are faced with, more than just bylaws and board elections. We are faced with a question of character, the character of this community. For months, a shadow of intolerance and intimidation has been allowed to lengthen over Oak Haven Trails. It culminated in an act of violence that terrified innocent children and threatened the very fabric of what it means to be a neighbor, a community. She spoke of the unique vulnerability of children with disabilities and the profound courage they displayed every day. She spoke of the therapy horses, not as nuisances, but as healers, as silent partners, in small miracles of recovery and joy. She spoke of the responsibility that came with living in a society, the duty to protect the vulnerable, to stand against hatred, to foster compassion. The badge I wear, she continued, her hand resting lightly on her belt, is a symbol of a promise to serve and protect. But that promise is not mine alone to keep. It belongs to all of us. Every resident who chooses empathy over apathy, courage over complacency, is upholding that promise. The decisions you make tonight will send a clear message. They will define whether Oak Haven Trails is a place where fear takes root or where harmony and respect flourish. Her speech was met not with applause, but with a deep, reflective silence, followed by a slow, rising wave of heartfelt acclamation that grew into a thunderous ovation. The votes that followed were a foregone conclusion. Harold Jenkins and the complicit board members were overwhelmingly voted out. Deirdre Finch was symbolically stripped of all HOA affiliations, and the new Community Harmony and Safety Charter, with its robust protections for programs like Serenity Reigns, its emphasis on mediation and de-escalation, and its zero-tolerance policy for harassment and intimidation, was ratified with a near-unanimous mandate. Alana Carlisle and her team departed swiftly, their faces grim. The community had spoken its voice clear and united. The legal downfall of Deirdre Finch was as methodical as it was inevitable. Armed with her voluminous online hate speech, the meticulously documented evidence of her premeditated inquiries about using firearms against the horses, and the powerful testimonies of the victims and eyewitnesses, the district attorney's office built an unassailable case. Alana Carlisle's attempts to paint Deirdre as a mentally fragile widow, driven to an unfortunate overreaction by relentless provocation, were systematically dismantled. The prosecution, led by a sharp, compassionate assistant district attorney named Ben Carter, portrayed Deirdre as a calculating, ideologically motivated individual who constituted a clear and present danger to the community. The trial, which attracted significant media attention, lasted 2 weeks. The jury heard from the children's parents, their voices thick with emotion, as they described the lasting trauma inflicted upon their families. They heard from the dedicated staff of Serenity Reigns, who detailed Deirdre's campaign of harassment. Ava Rostova testified her account of the events of that horrific Saturday morning, delivered with a calm, professional precision that nonetheless conveyed the gravity of the situation. The defense's attempts to discredit the witnesses or downplay Deirdre's actions fell flat against the mountain of evidence. Deirdre Finch herself, upon her lawyer's advice, did not take the stand. The jury returned guilty verdicts on all major counts: multiple felony charges of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, reckless endangerment causing substantial risk of serious bodily harm, and numerous counts of felony animal cruelty, the latter enhanced due to the victims being certified therapy animals. At the sentencing hearing, ADA Ben Carter argued for the maximum possible penalty, citing Deirdre's utter lack of remorse, the profound vulnerability of her victims, and the ideologically driven nature of her crimes. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense jurist named Marianne Albright, delivered a scathing indictment of Deirdre's character and actions before pronouncing sentence. Ms. Finch, Judge Albright, stated, her gaze fixed on the defendant. "Your actions on that day were not merely reckless, they were depraved. You targeted the most vulnerable among us, children with disabilities and the animals that provided them solace and healing, with a chilling premeditation and a profound lack of humanity. Your professed concern for property values and neighborhood tranquility was nothing more than a flimsy veneer for a deep-seated prejudice and a monstrous sense of entitlement. This court finds that you pose a significant and ongoing threat to public safety." Deirdre Finch was sentenced to 15 years in state prison with eligibility for parole only after serving a minimum of 10 years. She was also ordered to pay substantial restitution to Serenity Reigns to cover veterinary bills, enhanced security measures, and ongoing trauma counseling for the affected children and their families. A permanent ironclad restraining order was issued, prohibiting her from ever owning firearms again or from coming within a 5-mile radius of Serenity Reigns, its staff, or any of its participants upon her eventual release. Her meticulously maintained house on Sycamore Lane, the fortress from which she had waged her war of intolerance, was subsequently seized and sold at auction, the proceeds contributing to her restitution payments. The new owners, a young family with 3 boisterous children and a friendly golden retriever, quickly filled its sterile rooms with laughter, warmth, and a refreshing lack of oppressive order. The resolution for the community of Oak Haven Trails and for Serenity Reigns was a journey of healing, resilience, and ultimately transformation. The trauma of the shooting left deep scars, particularly on the children directly involved, but it also forged an unbreakable bond of solidarity and support. Serenity Reigns, buoyed by an outpouring of donations and volunteer assistance from Oak Haven Trails and the wider city, not only repaired its physical and emotional damages, but also expanded its outreach. They developed new programs in partnership with local schools, focusing on anti-bullying initiatives and promoting empathy and understanding towards individuals with disabilities and the therapeutic role of animals. The bridle paths bordering Oak Haven Trails were officially renamed the Serenity Trails, adorned with brightly painted signs, created by the therapy children themselves, depicting smiling horses and messages of peace and welcome. The reconstituted Oak Haven Trails homeowners Association, under new progressive leadership, became a model of proactive community engagement. They worked closely with Serenity Reigns to host joint community events, fall festivals, spring open houses, even a Meet the Therapy Horses Day that became an annual highlight. The stringent, often nonsensical rules of Deirdre Finch's era were systematically dismantled, replaced by a common-sense charter that emphasized mutual respect, inclusivity, and the celebration of diversity. The oppressive quiet she had so desperately sought to enforce was replaced by the vibrant, joyful sounds of a community reborn. Children's laughter, neighbors chatting over fences, and the gentle, rhythmic clip-clop of therapy horses carrying their precious cargo along paths now truly dedicated to peace. Captain Eva Rostova found that the horrific incident on Sycamore Lane had paradoxically deepened her connection to her own neighborhood and reaffirmed the profound importance of her life's work. Her mounted police division became even more actively involved in community outreach with officers and their equine partners, making regular friendly visits to schools, community centers, and of course, Serenity Reigns. Ava herself, despite the ever-increasing demands of her command, made it a point to visit the center frequently, not in her official capacity, but as a friend, a supporter, a fellow horse lover. She would often find Dr. Reed overseeing a session, his kind eyes crinkling with pleasure as he watched a child achieve a small but significant milestone. She'd share a quiet word with Sarah, or offer a comforting scratch to Gus Thor, or even the once traumatized Sunshine, now fully recovered and calmly carrying a new generation of eager young riders. One crisp autumn afternoon, nearly a year after the shooting, Ava was enjoying a rare quiet moment on her own porch, a steaming mug of herbal tea warming her hands, Vulcan, her retired police horse, contentedly munching hay in his small paddock behind her house. The familiar sound of approaching hooves made her look up. It was young Leo, the boy who had been on Gus during the shooting, the boy whose silent terror had so deeply affected her. He was riding Gus confidently, a bright, genuine smile illuminating his face. He was no longer silent. As he passed Eva's house, guided by Chloe, the volunteer who had also shown such courage, that day Leo looked over and waved his voice, though still soft, carrying clearly in the still afternoon air. "Hi, Captain Ava. Hi, Vulcan," he called out, his smile widening. Gus flicked his ears in acknowledgement, his massive head nodding gently. Ava's heart swelled. She raised her mug in salute. "Hello, Leo. Hello, Gus. Looking magnificent, both of you." As they continued down the path, Leo's happy chatter drifting back to her, Ava leaned back in her chair, a profound sense of peace settling over her. The shadows of Deirdre Finch's hatred had finally fully receded, chased away by the resilient light of compassion, courage, and the enduring, extraordinary bond between humans and horses. The battle had been hard fought, the wounds deep, but Oak Haven Trails and the brave souls of Serenity Reigns had emerged stronger, more united, and more deeply committed than ever to the healing power of kindness. And that Ava knew was a victory that resonated far beyond the quiet suburban streets, a testament to the enduring promise of hope in the face of darkness.